Chris Grenier realized too late that the river would not look the same that morning. He had been working as field staff in the Pantanal for 15 years. It is known as the world's largest wetland. He knew these lands, which stretch from Brazil to Paraguay and Bolivia, home to millions of animal species, and which are either scorching hot or completely submerged depending on the season, like the back of his hand. He knew which channel flowed where, which tree roots extended into the water on which bank, and which bird built its nest in which reed bed. He was not a biologist or a forest engineer. He was a contractor for a small environmental foundation. His salary was low, his equipment old and inadequate. But he had never considered quitting this job. That morning, the water surface looked calm, just a slight current, fog, and the sound of a heron in the distance. He lowered his canoe into the water, put his GPS device in his bag, and pulled out his paddle. The first hour was normal. He moved into the northeast channel, saw a few caimans, took notes. Then a crackling sound came from his radio. "Chris, respond immediately." The voice belonged to Donna Cardoso. She was the foundation's local coordinator, a woman in her 60s who knew this area better than Chris. "It rained all night in the upper basin. The water is rising fast. Turn back now." As Chris prepared to turn back, he noticed something among the treetops at the other end of the channel. First, he saw the yellow color, then a movement. He pulled the oar backwards and steered the canoe in that direction. As he approached the island, he couldn't quite make out what he was seeing at first. Yet when the waters rose in the Pantanal, land animals would go to higher ground. He had known this for 15 years, but he had never encountered the scene before him before. A small patch of land, about 3 meters in diameter, was completely surrounded by water, and right in the middle of that patch of land lay a jaguar, its belly swollen, its legs trembling. What he saw was a pregnant jaguar, her belly unusually swollen, her skin stretched tight. And just then, as Chris watched her, the animal's entire body tensed. She opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound. The waters continued to rise. Chris moved the canoe closer. The jaguar lifted its head and looked at him. Its eyes were yellowed, tired, large, and there was something different in them. It wasn't fear. It was more like an expression a predator should never have. It was helplessness. And it was as if its eyes were saying, "I've reached the end of the road." The radio crackled again. "Donna Cardoso." "Chris, where are you? The water is coming for you." "I found something," said Chris. "A pregnant jaguar. The water is rising. I can't leave her here." Donna was shocked. She was silent for a moment. "Chris, you have very little time." She looked around. The color of the water coming from upstream was beginning to change. It was darker and faster. It would take about an hour for the muddy floodwater from the upper basin to reach Chris. "What are you going to do?" said Donna. He didn't know what to do either, but he couldn't leave that animal there. He looked at the canoe. There wasn't much room for himself and his equipment. If he took a pregnant jaguar, especially one in labor, with him, it would be the end of life for both of them. But the waters were rising. He pulled up to the shore of the island. The jaguar raised its head, baring its teeth. But it didn't attack. It just watched. A healthy jaguar would have attacked or fled long ago. This animal was so exhausted, so heavy and worn out, that it didn't even have the strength to react. He took his gloves out of his bag. Then he took out the thin but durable nylon spare raincoat from his bag and spread it on the ground. He had a plan in mind, but it wasn't a good one. It was just the only plan he had. He got out of the canoe. His feet sank into the mud. The water came up to his ankles and was very cold. It was July, but it was winter in the Pantanal at this time of year. The friagem, coming from Antarctica, had reached the region. He walked slowly toward the jaguar, and he kept his hands open, trying to show he wasn't threatening. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I'm here. Just a minute." The animal looked at him. It tensed again, this time longer, more intensely, but weakly. He could see the cubs moving inside its belly. It stopped 2 meters away. It was a large jaguar, weighing over 70 kilograms on average. With the cubs in its belly, it was heavier and had to carry them. He moved slowly forward and knelt beside the jaguar, placing his hands beside the animal. The jaguar looked at him. Chris looked at the jaguar. For 5 seconds, neither moved. As if understanding he had come to help, the animal turned its head and didn't look back. It was exhausted. He had been doing this job for 15 years, but that moment was unforgettably meaningful. Those 5 seconds when a jaguar decided to trust him. It was almost impossible to move it. He tried to push the nylon underneath it, and the animal turned. He tried to lift it, but couldn't. His hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from fear. With every contraction, the animal showed its long, yellow teeth in pain. But each time, his heart ached. The water was rising, submerging the edges of the island. The ground beneath his feet was now underwater. Time was running out. The radio crackled again. This time it was Renato speaking. "Chris, it's Renato. Donna sent me. I'm coming to you in a motorboat. Give me your coordinates." He gave his coordinates. His voice was clear, but his knees were shaking. "Okay, wait there," said Renato. That was his only option anyway. The jaguar writhed again. It was trying to move. Chris put his hand on its chest, trying to calm it down. Its fur was soaked, thick, and he could feel its muscles trembling. Under his palm, he could feel the jaguar's heart beating fast, in panic. The water was up to his knees. Then he heard a sound. It wasn't the sound of an approaching boat. It was a different sound. And the sound was soft and steady. It was as if something large was coming through the water. He had heard these sounds for 15 years and recognized this one. He raised his head. The sound was coming from the left side of the channel. Chris paid close attention. First he saw a large shadow. Then the shadow slowly began to take shape. The approaching giant was a grey Pantanal tapir. Tapirs are one of South America's largest mammals. The approaching tapir was a full-grown adult, weighing over 200 pounds. Chris panicked. Its small black eyes were staring directly at Chris. Tapirs were normally one of the jaguar's primary prey, but this tapir was approaching them with determination. He couldn't understand it. As Chris tried to stay still, the jaguar growled behind him. The tapir calmly walked to the shore and approached the jaguar. It stopped a meter away. It extended its nose and touched the jaguar's forehead, as if saying something. The jaguar was unresponsive. Chris forgot to breathe in his astonishment. The tapir stood behind the jaguar, facing the wind. With its large, heavy body, it was like a concrete wall. And at that moment, Chris understood. The floodwind was like ice. With its massive 200-pound body, the tapir formed a living protective wall for this suffering animal. This creature, which under normal circumstances would be the jaguar's prey, now stood beside it, protecting it with the warmth of its body. He had been here for years and had never witnessed such a scene. The sound of the approaching boat came then. Renato was 17 years old. His face was still childlike, but he stood confidently on the boat. When he approached the island, he couldn't believe the scene he saw. Chris, his knees sunk in mud, a pregnant jaguar beside him, and a large tapir standing behind him. "What is this?" was all he could say. The tapir showed no reaction when it saw the boat. It just turned and looked at them with a calm expression. It was as if it was saying, "It's your job now." They placed the nylon under the jaguar again. Chris and Renato communicated with their eyes without saying a word. They both put their hands under the animal, grabbed both ends of the nylon, and lifted it together. The animal groaned. Its weight was incredible. Chris's knees began to tremble. Renato's face flushed, and all the muscles from his fingers to his arms ached. They struggled to get the Jaguar into the boat. Only then did the tapir move away and swim toward the canal. A little further on, it looked back at them and disappeared from view. The island was submerged half an hour later. Donna Cardoso later told Chris this. Half an hour. What if Chris had noticed the Jaguar 5 minutes later? If Renato had arrived 10 minutes later? If the tapir hadn't shielded him from the wind and kept him warm? Chris went over these calculations many times later. The boat moved slowly, the engine straining. Chris knelt beside the Jaguar, his hand on its side. With each contraction, the animal tensed, its eyes slowly opening and closing. Each time they closed, Chris wondered if they would open again. The foundation station was set up on a wooden platform by the riverbank. Dr. Marana, the only veterinarian in the area, worked part-time only 3 days a week. That day, by chance, she was there. When the boat approached the shore, she ran to it. She couldn't hide her surprise when she saw the scene. The Jaguar, Chris, Renato, all muddy and soaking wet. She paused for a moment. It was the moment when professionals understand the situation at a glance. Then, in a clear voice, she said, "Get inside immediately. The birth is about to begin." Jaguar was quickly moved to the examination room. Clean cloths were spread on the floor. While Dr. Marana prepared her equipment, she sent Chris outside the door. Chris crouched down in front of the door. That day, he realized once again how difficult waiting could be. Sounds came from inside. Dr. Marana's calm, low voice, the clinking of instruments. Every now and then, the Jaguar's moans could be heard, and with each moan, Chris's heart sank. After a while, Renato arrived. He held 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to Chris. Both were soaked through, both still shivering from the cold. Not a single word passed between them. 40 minutes later, the door slowly opened. Dr. Camilla emerged, her mask pulled down to her chin, a weary expression on her face. "They're both alive," she said. Chris couldn't say anything. "There are 2 babies," said Dr. Camilla. "Premature, but they're all healthy. Under these conditions, we could have lost them. But the mother is incredibly strong. If you had been half an hour later," she said, and couldn't finish her sentence. Chris didn't leave the station that night. He couldn't sleep. He leaned his back against the wall in front of the small examination room door and listened to the sounds coming from inside. The faint murmurs of the cubs, the mother's slow and steady breathing. He dozed off at some point before dawn. When he opened his eyes, the sun was just rising above the horizon. Dr. Marana opened the door slightly. Chris looked inside. The mother Jaguar was nursing her cubs. Both were very small, almost palm-sized, their spots still indistinct, their eyes not yet fully open. But they were breathing, strong, steady breaths. A moment later, the mother lifted her head and turned her gaze to Chris. She looked at him gratefully for a moment. Then Chris smiled, slowly closed the door, and went down to the riverbank. There was still a layer of mist over the river, but the waters had receded to their normal level, and things had calmed down. It was very different from the scene the day before. The treatment lasted 3 weeks. Dr. Marana came to the station every day. She prepared special mixtures for the cubs. She closely monitored the mother's risk of infection and measured her blood values. She visited Chris every morning and monitored his condition. Every time the Jaguar saw Chris, she looked at him with grateful eyes. She thanked him in a soft voice. This was the greatest reward for Chris. Dr. Marana determined the release date. The mother's blood values had returned to normal. The cubs had reached sufficient weight. That morning, everyone gathered at the station. Chris, Renato, Dr. Marana, Donna Cardoso. All eyes were on the door. Dr. Mirana opened the door. The mother jaguar walked from inside towards the door. She paused at the threshold. She sniffed inside and outside. Then she stepped outside. Slowly, cautiously. Two cute little cubs stumbled along beside her, bumping into each other as they followed her. Two cute little cubs, curiously looking around, discovering the world for the first time. They exited the door and reached the shore. The mother jaguar paused for a moment. She turned. She looked at Chris. It was a long, direct gaze. Her yellow-green eyes were locked on him. The helplessness of that first day was gone from those eyes. Another emotion had taken its place. That look was indescribable. Chris, who had been doing this job for 15 years, couldn't name that emotion. Renato, standing beside him, let out a slight sigh. Donna Cardoso's eyes were teary, and she smiled with happiness. Then the jaguar turned. The cubs followed her. 3 bodies blended into the green and disappeared from sight within a few seconds. No one spoke for a long time. There was a slight sadness brought on by happiness and farewell. 6 months passed. Life had returned to normal. Morning patrols, checks along the canals, reports written. Ordinary days continued. One morning, while Chris was on patrol on the eastern branch of the canal, he suddenly dropped his shovel. He didn't know why he did it, and it was an instinctive movement, a feeling he couldn't explain. He waited. The surroundings were silent. Then movement appeared on the shore. He paid close attention. 3 jaguars. He recognized them immediately. The mother was in front, large and calm, confident. The cubs followed her. They had grown. They no longer stumbled. They chased each other along the shore, playing with an exuberant expression. The mother turned her head for a moment. She noticed Chris. She stopped and looked at him. One of the cubs ran into her side. The mother didn't even turn her head. Her gaze was still on Chris, that long, calm, silent, but revealing look. Then she let out a low, deep sound. The cubs gathered around her. Together, they walked slowly toward the forest. Before leaving, the mother turned once more to look toward the edge of the reeds. One last look. Then they all disappeared into the greenery of the forest. Chris remained motionless for a long time. The river flowed. The birds sang. Everything was as it always had been. He had been doing this job for 15 years. He had witnessed all kinds of disasters. He had seen caimans, floods, fires. But that morning, as he reached for the oar, he noticed his hands were trembling. This trembling was not from fear. The Pantanal had taught him many things over 15 years. But that day, a tapir approaching a pregnant jaguar, stranded in the middle of the floods without expecting anything in return, had taught him the greatest lesson of all those years. In nature, compassion transcends species. Chris knew this before, but that morning, he truly felt it for the first time. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my MEF Wildlife Rescues channel. We'll be back with more incredible stories from the wild. Thank you.